Welcome, my creepy campers, to Vicarious Creepy Corner. We're going camping this weekend. Camping with Cecilia. And I've brought along a very special story to tell around the campfire. Well, got your creepers on. By the way, you might want to keep your eye on the outskirts of those trees while I'm telling this tale. In 2003, I was 21. I was attending college along with my best friend and sidekick, Cecilia. We were absolutely wild in love with nature and all things wild. We had spent our childhoods roaming the forest, wading in creeks, catching crawdads and minnows. We loved climbing trees and fantasizing about having great adventures. We battled mythical creatures for the good of mankind, and now here we were as adults studying forestry. We had dreams of defending those forests and our fantasies that we held so dear. I was absolutely ecstatic when my professor announced an opportunity for some extra credit. He suggested that we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along some trails and paths, just to remind ourselves why we were doing what we were doing. As an avid hiker, I knew of a hiking trail a few hours over from our town that offered plenty of room to walk, very little crowding. The only ones who really walked down there were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one of them on that ever-winding, expanding trail through the forest seemed pretty slim. "Hey, Cecilia, want to take a trip down to the preserve with me?" "Hell yeah!" A few days later, Cecilia and I began gathering up our camping supplies. We were so excited we bought new tents, new sleeping bags, gathered up what food we thought we'd need over the next few days, and soon enough we were all packed up and ready to head out. We took my small car with the trunk stuffed and our bags tied up on the roof down the highway a few hours east. By the time we got there, it was mid-afternoon. Still plenty of time to walk, but also a bad time to find parking. There was plenty of people there walking dogs and setting up lunches, trailing paths. "I thought you said it'd be quiet," Cecilia said, and I rolled my eyes in response. "I'm sure these kids aren't planning on hiking in a few days. It'll get quiet, I promise." I spun around and began taking the large packs off the roof of the vehicle. For as large as they were surprisingly easy to carry. Cecilia slipped the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to start heading towards the park. As we approached the trail's entrance, we saw the ranger. "You guys heading in?" she asked. There was no hostility or caution in her tone. She was just merely asking a simple question. "Yeah, that's all right." "Of course. Just let me know your names and take my card. If you need anything, call down to the station. There's a couple of ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them if you need to. Just make sure you clean up." The ranger gave us a welcoming smile and handed me a business card for the local ranger station. Thank you. My name's Deborah, and this is Cecilia." Cecilia gave a small nod to the ranger, and she nodded back respectfully. "Well, Cecilia and Deborah, you enjoy yourselves out there. We'll be patrolling around, so if you see us, say hi." And with those words, the ranger backed away from the entrance, and we began our trek. We spent half of the first day slowly walking in quiet appreciation. There's something so liberating about walking with no time limit. It's like all the world's stress just slides right off your back. The only thing you have to worry about is yourself. In that exact moment, you are all that matters. No bills, no studies, no cares. Just avoid snakes and strange plants and you're all set. It wasn't too long into the journey before the sun began to nestle itself behind the trees. The warm but steady drop in temperature of the late afternoon winds began to sweep up under our sweaty clothes. Let's find a clearing to settle into, Cecilia said, and I nodded in approval. We noticed a small opening further down the path, clearly made by others who had taken this previously. We set up our tents and started a small fire. After all that walking and hard work, we were finally ready to be off our feet. Cecilia plopped herself down in front of the fire and pulled out a granola bar. I felt a rumble in my stomach and pulled out one of my own. "This place is truly beautiful," she said, taking a bite out of her bar. "Yeah, I haven't seen many animals, though." I unwrapped my bar and raised it to my lips, ready to take a bite, when I quickly glanced over Cecilia and froze. In the increasingly darkened forest, just off the trail, just behind Cecilia, was something small in the grass. It was cloaked in darkness, but I assumed it had to have been some sort of small critter. I began to squint my eyes, trying to focus on whatever it was, and it seemed to fade out of existence, going straight into the ground. "Everything all right?" Cecilia asked. I realized then it must have seemed like I was staring at her with food half in my mouth, and I laughed. "Yeah, sorry. I thought I saw an animal or something off in the woods. It was small. Could have just been a rabbit or something. It must have burrowed into the ground, though." My friend peered over her shoulder into the silent woods and looked around. I knew she wouldn't see anything. Whatever it was had left as quickly as I had caught sight of it. We ended up finishing our meal, extinguishing the fire, and climbing into our separate tents. I slept like a log. All that walking put me out like a light. It wasn't until morning that I woke up. I stumbled out of the tent, nearly tripping on the small fabric ledge at the exit of my portable shelter, and the hot, humid summer morning sun hit me like a pile of bricks. "Just so you know, I think we need to be watching out for snakes," Cecilia said. I looked over at her to see her undoing the tent supports from the forest floor. "Did you see one?" I asked. I bent down and followed suit with the camp cleanup. "I think so. I heard something rumbling on the bottom of my tent last night. When I opened my eyes, the indents on my walls like a pretty big, thick snake trying to wiggle its way in." Now, she didn't seem bothered by the potential late-night visitors, so I kept her warning in my mind but continued on. A few hours into our journey, we realized that a storm was brewing overhead. None of the forecasts that we had watched had warned us of any storms. "I wonder how long until it rains." Cecilia was interrupted by a large thunderclap nearby in the clouds, and a few raindrops started to fall from the dimly lit sky. The rain was a little more than a small drizzle at that moment, but it was clear it was going to get worse. "Let's hurry up and find a place to set up." I watched as she began to increase her pace. She went from a walk into a jog, heading deeper into the forest down the trail, and I was right behind her. For a while, it seemed like we weren't going to find a clearing any time soon. We were already drenched. Another strong explosion of thunder erupted from above, and this time the floodgates opened. Rain began to fall with a purpose and with enough force to erupt on impact. "Hey, right over here!" I heard Cecilia yell, and she was running off down the main path on a side trail. I looked at where she was heading, and I saw a small cabin. I followed her down that tiny path, and suddenly the tip of my foot slid underneath something, and the momentum carried me downwards, face first, into the mud. I looked down to my feet and saw what looked like a thin tree root, also caked in dirt, erupting out of the ground, except that it was moving just underneath the mud. Then it clicked. Snakes! I had just tripped over one of them. I felt a shiver cross over my back, and I jolted up to my feet and ran down that path, abandoning that snake behind. Without another incident, I made it to the cabin door and busted inside, finally free from that hurricane-like storm. "Whoa!" a familiar voice rang out in the shack. I looked over to see a drenched but otherwise clean Cecilia staring at me with an amused smile on her face. "Decide to have a wrestling match out there? Oh, ha ha, very funny," I said, looking down at myself. I was covered in mud from head to toe. "I think I met one of your snakes out there. It decided to give me a little trip." "Oh, really?" Cecilia said, and she grabbed me and turned me around and began rummaging through my pack. "You were right. They were pretty thick. I wonder what kind they are. I can't imagine them being venomous, being that wide." I felt my pack jerking as she pulled items out. I took some time to look around the cabin as Cecilia pulled the towels free. The cabin was wooden, old, and almost completely empty. There was a cooking stove off to one side, a small table with 2 chairs, and a small cot. It had but one blanket and a few odds and ends of various survival-type foods, and a small first aid kit, but clearly it was meant only for one night. "Here, get yourself cleaned up." I turned around and Cecilia handed me a handful of towels. I immediately wiped off my face. "Thanks," I replied to her. She began setting things up. I put my pack down against the door and walked over to a window. I watched as the rain continued its assault on the earth, the dirt running like rivers down the valleys and trails, both natural and man-made. "It looks terrible outside," I remarked. I heard a small groan of acknowledgment come from behind me. I let my eyes trail over the forested wetland, over to the path we took to get up here. My body locked up, and I saw something right where I had tripped. Something was protruding out of the ground like a small pillar. I rubbed the inside of the window fruitlessly to clear off the fog and obstructing rain. I could barely make out what looked like a thick, partially submerged branch, broken off on one end. And there were small twigs splintering off towards sky. "Hey, come over here and take a look at this," I called out to Cecilia, who was still digging around in her bags. "Is it a snake?" she asked, rising to her feet. "I don't think so. It looks weird, though." I watched the mud-coated object get hammered by the rain as Cecilia approached and peered outside. "Is that a tree root?" she suggested. Whatever it was wasn't moving. "Wait," Cecilia chimed in again. "Look at the color." As the rain washed over the object, the less obstructed by mud the object became. I narrowed my eyes, pushed past the raindrops on the window, and noticed exactly what Cecilia was talking about. Whatever was under that mud was a pale shade of gray. "Oh my God!" Cecilia gasped and grabbed her mouth. "What is it?" I turned and looked at her. "Look at the end of it," she said, holding her breath. I turned my gaze back outward and focused in. I felt my heart drop. They were fingertips. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as a grave. "Oh my God. We should call the Rangers and get them out here. Where's their card?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wet but legible business card. Without hesitation, Cecilia snatched it out of my hand and began dialing the number. "Hello? Hello? I'd like to report something on one of the trails." She paced back and forth. I turned and kept my gaze on the hand. It looked petrified in place, fingers eagerly reaching towards the sky, letting the water rush over it. We're at, I heard the voice on the other end of the phone chirp up, and Cecilia nodded. Hey, Deborah, can you take a look outside and tell me what the numbers are next to the door? I peeled my eyes away from the hand and walked over to the door. I opened it up and stepped out. I peered towards the arm, and I could see it more clearly without the blurry window between us. It was gray, hairless, and smooth. I had to force my eyes away from it to view the number on the wall. 17. I turned back towards the direction of the arm and saw nothing in its place, just the mud quickly running down the trail. I swallowed hard and rushed back inside. The number's 17, but I think the arm fell back into the mud. It's not there anymore. Cecilia's eyes went wide as she relayed that information over to the dispatcher. It wasn't too long before she pulled the phone away from her ear and hung up. They told us to stay put. This storm's not going to pass anytime soon. They've got a ranger coming out, and the police have been informed. It might take them a while to reach us out here. I bit my lip and looked back outside towards the empty path. I hope it didn't get dragged away by the current. Cecilia came up right beside me, joining me at the window. I'm sure they'll be able to follow that mud slick down to wherever it goes. On the bright side, that rain cleaned you up a bit. She gave a reassuring smile, and I looked down at myself. My clothes were still riddled with mud, but the rain on my skin had washed off. I guess that's always a plus. Come on, Deborah. Let's make ourselves at home at least. I'll just lock the door in case. Well, you know. Why, in case there's a killer out there? I mumbled at her, and she walked over to the door and flipped the lock. We made a small fire in the wood stove, and after a few minutes we had our dinner laid out in front of us. We agreed that once that ranger got there, our little expedition was over. Let's eat and try to get some sleep, I said. Cecilia nodded and joined in on the feast. With full stomachs, we set up for bed. I noticed my friend kept looking out towards the darkened windows. I could feel tension in the air. Is everything all right? I asked. Cecilia looked at me apprehensively. I just feel weird, like I'm being watched. I'm sure it's nothing, but just to be on the safe side. She ripped off the pillowcase and then mine before walking over to the windows and draping them over the glass as makeshift curtains. I just don't want anybody looking in at us while we sleep. I don't blame you. I made my way to the bedroll and my caseless pillow before lying down, trying to get comfortable. Cecilia did the same. It was a few hours into the night before I heard Cecilia's hushed voice. Deborah, wake up. Do you hear that? I opened my eyes and met Cecilia's gaze. She was staring at the cabinet of the door. I spent a few seconds watching the door before I saw the handle of the door jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. What do we do? Maybe it's that our conversation was interrupted by a loud knocking coming from the other side of the wooden door. I jumped to my feet. It's got to be the cops. I walked over to the door. Who's out there? Silence. Again I yelled. And then, abruptly, the banging started again. I took a step back away from the door. Each impact on that door rocked the wooden door frame. I watched as one of the pillowcases began to slip off the window. No, Cecilia whispered, tears in her eyes. I rushed over to the window just as the fabric fell and was met face to face with the darkness outside. The banging on the door stopped abruptly. I carefully kneeled down and grabbed the fabric in my hands and tossed it back over the window. Oh, appearing, Out of the darkness was the palm of a hand, and it slapped on the window with a heavy force. I could see the pale palm in the shroud of the blackness outside. I quickly threw the pillowcase back on the window and backed up to Cecilia. She was shivering. Her eyes were wide with fear. "That's the hand, Deborah. That's the hand that was outside earlier." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I wrapped my arms around Cecilia as much as for my comfort as hers. That wet palm of a hand just kept slapping against the glass. I held on to Cecilia. She balled up, and I kept my eyes focused on that pillowcase covering the glass, hoping it wouldn't fall and expose that lifeless arm again. And then, with one last thud, it stopped. A light shone through the fabric of the window mere seconds after the attack halted. I could hear the sounds of tires rolling up towards the cabin. I let out a sigh and a prayer that the ranger had finally made it. I heard the vehicle stop just outside, and I finally heard the voice call out, "Cecilia? Deborah? You's in there?" The voice sounded familiar. It was the ranger from the day prior. I slid to my feet, dragging Cecilia with me. "Yes, we're inside, but someone's out there," I yelled. I rushed over to the door and opened it to see the ranger. She was facing us, but the light from her rover, coupled with her hat, covered her body in shadows. She seemed rigid. "Come on out of that box. We'll get you home," the ranger said. Her voice seemed different, disjointed somehow. I stayed quiet. Something is very wrong here. "Step out of there now," the voice grumbled, unrecognizable from earlier. "Are you all right?" I called out, just a little bit more than a whisper. The ranger tilted her head backward. Her hat fell off, which allowed the light from behind her to illuminate her face, and her eyes were wide and full of pain and fear. Her lips were quivering in shock. I backed up more into the doorway and watched as two long gray fingers trailed their way out from behind the ranger's head. And then I saw, right next to the ranger's feet, a half-submerged human face dug deeply into the mud. Its black, cold eyes shone from somewhere unknown. Whatever this was a monster of the strictest definition. Its gaze was so vastly separated from humanity. I locked eyes with this thing, human in shape, deviled in eyes. I saw the ranger fall into the mud. Just behind her head was the arm stretching out of the ground. Without another warning, the ranger's body was ripped under the earth and devoured by the mud. The creature's eyes stared at me with a deadening gaze. It was observing me. The head effortlessly started gliding through the earth towards the cabin, its fingers and arms popping out from the earth. I had stored enough courage to slam that door shut and lock it before running over to Cecilia, who had seen the whole thing. "What was that?" she asked. Her voice was trembling. I shook my head and slumped down next to her. "I don't know." We sat in silence until the sounds of scratching came up from below the floorboards. All we could do was sit in the corner farthest away from the window and pray it didn't get us. I didn't know what to do. I sat there as the floor cracked open and mud crept up through the seams of the boards. I sat, waiting to die, but Cecilia had other plans. She grabbed my hand and yanked me up to my feet. She stared at the door for a split second before she burst it open and sprinting off, dragging me behind her towards the ranger's vehicle. Lucky for us, the ranger had never shut it off. We both hopped in and zipped off down that path where we had come from. I took a glance back towards the cabin to see it crumbling into the earth in a big heap of rubble. But there was something else there, still half submerged on the path mere yards away from us, was that unblinking head. Its black eyes shone dead set and emotionless on our escape. We kept driving and driving for God knows how long, until we came across the other rangers who were on a scouting mission up to us and their missing comrade. We told them everything, but we could tell by their looks of disbelief that we had said enough. We were labeled as emotionally distressed and unreliable witnesses. The powers that be listed the disappearance of the ranger as mishap by mudslide. Well, Cecilia, I hope that tale brought a certain amount of creep factor to your camping trip this weekend. I did so much enjoy telling that tale. You come back next week, okay? Hope you can sleep all right after that. Okay, all you new people out there, be sure to come back next week. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Check out my other videos and playlists. Creep Factors is what I do best.